Jake, she still can't write her name.
She's only 3, Linda. Give her time.
Time? That's what average kids need. We plan for exceptional.
Then maybe we planned wrong. I am Brooklyn Adams, born and raised in Willow Glen, a quiet suburban town on the northern edge of San Jose, California. From the outside, my family looked like a living Pinterest photo. A white picket fence like in old movies, a lavender-filled front yard, and every evening was a family dinner under soft golden light. But behind that white-painted wooden door, things were not as breathable as their polished exterior suggested. I was the firstborn of Jake and Linda Adams, a couple immersed in books on modern American parenting. My dad was a software engineer working in Palo Alto, obsessed with numbers and algorithms to the point where he once told my mom he wanted to raise a female Einstein. My mom? She was the hyper mom type even before I was born. She had read over 50 books on child psychology and applied every early development method she came across. I wasn't born to be a child. I was programmed like a long-term project. I once heard my mom refer to me as the pilot test during a phone call with her best friend. At 6 months old, I was already being shown flashcards. Every meal was a lesson in shapes, colors, and emotions. But I didn't develop according to their ideal growth charts. By the time I was 3, I still wrote the letter B backwards and struggled to count. And at that moment, the way my father looked at me completely changed. It was no longer the gaze of a proud parent, but the look of a coder facing a script that refused to compile. No anger, no sorrow, just quiet disappointment. And strangely, that hurt more than any yelling ever could. When I turned 4, my younger sister, Taylor, was born. And from that moment, the entire atmosphere in the house shifted like a new director had taken over the set. My parents started a whole new season where I was no longer the lead. Every room overflowed with educational toys, imported Swedish cloth books, and tools you'd only find in genius development centers. Me? I got pre-K worksheets taped to the fridge and was always the last to be praised no matter how hard I tried. There was an autumn afternoon I remember vividly. I was sitting quietly in the living room, carefully building a spaceship out of Lego bricks. My mom walked by, glanced at Taylor when he was only 8 months old, tapping a music button on her high chair. She smiled brightly, then looked at me. Taylor has already learned to respond to 3-step sequences. Brooklyn, just keep playing. It wasn't a slap, it wasn't a scolding, but it hurt just the same. When I was 7, I drew a picture of our home. Lavender flowers, golden sunlight, and our lazy cat I loved. I submitted that drawing to an art contest at school and won 2nd place. I came home, eyes glowing, proudly holding up my certificate to show my mom. She glanced at it and said, "Taylor spelled elephant today with her wooden letter blocks." Then she kept setting the table. No one asked what I had drawn. No one said the picture was beautiful. I learned to quietly celebrate my victories by taping certificates to the inside of my closet door, where no one else would ever see. I became a shadow in the very house I once believed was my home. I wasn't scolded, I wasn't yelled at, but I wasn't seen either. I felt like I was living in a room where everyone was having a conversation, only no one ever turned to look at me. And when you live long enough in that kind of silence, you start to believe that silence is where you belong. The painful part wasn't that Taylor was talented, it was that I wasn't allowed to be different. In my parents' eyes, I wasn't bright enough, not impressive enough, not gifted enough to be loved unconditionally. I had to earn every shred of affection, as if love itself came with grading scales and merit rubrics. From that point, I realized something that later became a guiding principle for the rest of my life. Not everyone will see your worth, but that doesn't mean you don't have any. My story didn't begin with an emotional explosion. It began with quiet drops of neglect, accumulating year by year. A child doesn't need to be hit to be hurt. Sometimes just being forgotten is enough to leave the heart quietly shattered. I used to believe that the upstairs room, the one in the left corner of the house, was the only thing in the world that truly belonged to me. It wasn't large, but it had a window that looked straight out to the small forest behind our house, where morning sunlight would filter through the leaves like soft beams pouring onto the wall. There, I hung my drawings, taped up little notes, and arranged my books by color, as if that miniature world was a place where I had complete freedom. But in a house where love always came with conditions, even something as seemingly simple as a bedroom could be taken away. I was 12 years old when it happened. Taylor was then in her breakthrough developmental stage. As my mom put it, she needed a learning space and a source of creative inspiration. I didn't realize those phrases meant I had to move out of my own room. That afternoon, I had just finished my math homework and was hanging a new sketch on the wall, an abstract image I had imagined from the season's first rain, when Taylor walked in. She stood in the doorway, hair neatly braided, holding a brand new French workbook, and casually said, "Mom says starting tomorrow I'll be in this room. I need space to set up a study desk and a special reading light." I laughed. "This is my room." Taylor shrugged. "Mom said you'd understand." I didn't understand. Not then. And honestly, I didn't want to. The next day, when I got home from school, everything was already done. My drawings had been taken off the wall, my books stuffed into cardboard boxes, and my old desk placed inside the room next to the laundry, a smaller, darker room that always buzzed with the rumbling of the dryer at night. The room that used to be mine was now a showcase of the latest learning gadgets for little Angel Taylor: a glossy white desk, blue light protection lamps, and even a mini ceiling-mounted language projector. I stood at the threshold of my old room, hand gripping my backpack strap, staring at Taylor's handwritten name taped to the door. I didn't cry. I just felt cold, like someone had erased my name from the family map. That evening, while Mom was wiping down the kitchen counters, I stepped in, voice shaky but firm. "Why did you do that, Mom? That was my room. I've been there since I first learned how to read." She didn't look up. "You're older now, Brooklyn. You should learn to make way. Taylor needs that room to reach her full potential. Don't make a fuss." That answer made me feel smaller than ever. I turned away, didn't argue. I knew even if I spoke, nothing would change. In that house, if Taylor needed it, she got it. If I needed something, I had to figure it out myself. In the days that followed, I didn't hang anything on the new room's walls. No pictures, no drawings, no color. I studied under dim light, on a desk too small to fit both my books and a lamp. The sound of the dryer behind me became a silent reminder that I was no longer in the official space of this family. But the thing that hurt most wasn't the room. It was my father's silence. He said nothing, didn't object, not a word when he saw me moving out. He just looked at me with a neutral gaze, as if this was no big deal. And that look quietly closed the final door of hope I had left for fairness in this family. From then on, I learned to live like a guest in the house, ate on time, did my homework in the proper place, made no noise, expected nothing. That dinner, Taylor proudly told everyone she was joining an advanced math class, speaking with such excitement as if the entire universe now revolved around her numbers. Mom smiled, eyes glowing with pride. Dad nodded, asking about her problem-solving techniques. I cut a piece of chicken on my plate. No one asked how my day was. I silently began to call my new room the buffer room, a temporary shelter, as if I was just staying there until someone came up with a better plan. And in my mind, I made a list. The places I would go someday, the things I would buy for myself, and one day. A room that was truly mine, where I wouldn't be displaced just because someone else was deemed more deserving. I didn't know when it would happen, but from that moment, I stopped seeking recognition. Instead, I quietly started preparing for the day I would step out of that house, not with anger, but with a calm and unwavering resolve. My teenage years passed in silence. No big shocks, no major arguments, but each day felt like a small scratch that slowly built up. And the scary part is that you start getting used to it, used to eating dinner in silence, used to glances that never land on you, and used to feeling like a quiet glitch in a system too busy to fix. I entered my senior year of high school like a quiet shadow within my own family. Everything still revolved around Taylor, now a top student at an expensive private school in Palo Alto. Every morning she was chauffeured in a brand new SUV, had private tutors come to the house every afternoon, and my mom updated her every progress on Facebook like it was a personal PR campaign. And me? I walked to public school, managed my college applications by myself, worked weekends at a local cafe, and studied in group sessions at the school library every night. I didn't complain. I had long stopped hoping for fairness. But I didn't expect the biggest disappointment to come during what seemed like a harmless dinner. That Friday, my grandparents, Bill and Margaret, came to visit from Sacramento. They were the only two people in my extended family who had never compared me to Taylor. Grandpa Bill had a habit of patting my head every time we met, and Grandma Margaret always made my favorite apple pie. Under the warm yellow light at the dinner table, Taylor enthusiastically shared her plans to attend a summer program at Stanford. My parents beamed like she had just been accepted into Harvard. When the laughter faded, Grandma Margaret turned to me, her eyes glowing gently. "And how about you, Brooklyn? Have you thought about college yet?" For the first time in many dinners, I felt like I had the right to speak. "Yes, I was just accepted into the business program at the University of Oregon," I said, unable to hide my excitement. "I'm still waiting to hear back from UC Davis. Oregon already offered me a partial scholarship, and if I get more financial aid—" "Brooklyn," my mom cut in, setting her knife and fork down, the sound hitting the table with a sharp echo. "Your father and I have talked. We won't be able to support your tuition this year." I froze. "But wasn't the college fund meant for both of us?" My dad chimed in, as if on cue. "We have to prioritize Taylor. Her Ivy League prep program is a rare opportunity." No one looked at me. No words of comfort. No sign of regret. I turned to Grandma Margaret, hoping she'd say something to ease the moment. But she simply set her spoon down quietly, her voice lowering. "Linda, both girls are my granddaughters. I can't sit here and watch one be left behind like this." My mom pressed her lips together. "You don't understand. This isn't—" "Yes, it is," Grandpa Bill interrupted. "It's very clear to all of us." That night, while I was washing dishes in the kitchen, Grandma Margaret walked in and gently placed her hand on my shoulder, just like she used to when I was little. "You don't have to carry this weight anymore, Brooklyn," she said. "Grandpa and I will cover your entire college tuition. No loans, no worries." I turned, eyes red. "But that's too much money." "It's never too much," she smiled, "when it's for someone who's always tried, yet never been recognized." That moment was the first time I truly felt seen. Not because I was smarter than Taylor, not because I had won some award, simply because I had always done my best. And finally, someone acknowledged it. That fall, I rolled my suitcase into the dorms at the University of Oregon. My mom saw me off with a half-hearted hug and a parting line. "Be frugal. Don't expect anything from us." Taylor didn't even lift her head from her phone. I pulled my suitcase across the dew-covered grass, step by step, slow but steady. I didn't look back. No more buffer room, no more dryer noises, no more cold stares. Only me, Brooklyn Adams, with an opportunity, a resolve, and for the first time in my life, a one-way ticket into a future I chose for myself. Stepping onto the campus of the University of Oregon felt like stepping into a whole new world. No shadow of Taylor, no judgmental looks from my parents, no framework imposed on me other than my own. I remember clearly that first morning in the dormitory. A small room just big enough for two people, sunlight filtering through striped curtains, and that strange yet liberating feeling. For the first time in my life, I got to start over, not to prove anything to anyone, but simply to live true to myself. I chose business because I had always loved analysis, not to analyze others to please them, but to understand how the world operates, how people make decisions, and how to turn ideas into real value. Underneath the quiet shell of a child pushed aside in her own family, I had silently learned how to observe. And now, I used that very skill to step into the world of finance. The early days weren't easy. I had no one to guide me, no connections, no insider experience from prestigious summer camps like the ones Taylor used to boast about. But I had one thing: relentless perseverance. I studied as if every line in the textbook was a rope pulling me out of the darkness of the past. I spent hours in the library, worked part-time at a downtown cafe, and took notes on every short conversation between customers and employees, just to better understand human behavior when money was involved. Gradually, professors started to notice. In Dr. Monroe's class, a finance expert who had worked on Wall Street, I was the only student who proposed an investment psychology model based on consumer behavior during crisis periods. When he asked why I thought of that approach, I simply replied, "Because not everyone invests for profit." Some people just want to feel like they're in control of something. He said nothing at the time, but a week later, I received an email recommending me for a summer internship at Bradley and Carter Capital, one of the leading investment firms in Seattle. The first interview was a challenge. 3 managers sat on the other side of a long glass table, each holding a copy of my resume. They didn't smile, they didn't nod, but I didn't flinch. When one of them asked, "In your opinion, what's the most important factor in building an investment strategy?" I looked him straight in the eyes and answered clearly, "It's not just the data, it's the psychology behind the numbers. People don't buy with logic, they buy with fear, hope, and sometimes guilt." The whole room fell silent for a few seconds. Then they nodded. I got the offer, and that summer changed the trajectory of my life. At Bradley and Carter, I didn't just plug numbers into spreadsheets. I joined the real-world risk analysis team, listened to senior advisors debate every strategic decision, and, most importantly, learned to trust my own voice. I was no longer little Brooklyn who got moved out of her room for lacking potential. I was Brooklyn Adams, someone with sharp observation, the ability to connect data and people, and a determination forged in a childhood where she was never chosen as the center. After the internship, I was invited back for a full-time position after graduation. In my final year of college, I was both an honor student and a research assistant for a behavioral finance project, a study that was later published in a top academic journal. When graduation came, I stood in a long line of students in forest green robes and looked around. No parents, no Taylor. But I wasn't sad. In my hand was a nameplate in bold, "Brooklyn Adams, Bachelor of Business, with distinction." In the audience, Grandpa Bill and Grandma Margaret stood up clapping until their hands turned red. That day, I didn't just graduate. I stepped out of the shadows completely, with strength born from ability, from every decision I had made, and from every sleepless night in that dorm room I traded for a future I built myself. I was once just a child who was never chosen, but now I chose myself, and that was the real beginning. I never expected an apology, not from my mother, not from my father, not from Taylor either. After years of being pushed aside, I had learned that some people will never see what they refuse to acknowledge. But what I didn't expect was that they could still hurt me one more time, even when I thought I was strong enough not to be affected anymore. Everything started when I received the official offer letter from Bradley and Carter Capital. They wanted me to take on the role of Chief Strategic Investment Officer, a position with no precedent for someone as young as me, especially a 26-year-old woman. It wasn't just a career milestone. It was a statement. I had risen from broken pieces, using nothing but my own hands. I decided to host a small party to celebrate. Nothing grand, nothing fancy, just a gathering to thank those who had believed in me and walked alongside me to this point. I told Grandma Margaret during a video call, her eyes glistening when I said, "I want to invite you and Grandpa, a few close friends, and some colleagues. A cozy dinner, maybe at a small restaurant, or how about letting your mom organize it?" She hesitated. "Linda called to check in recently." I was unsure, but then, when my mom reached out herself, offering to host the party at the old house in Willow Glen, I thought, maybe this is a chance to reconnect. Mom said, "You just need to send the money for the party. I'll take care of the decorations, food, and guest list." I transferred $3,500, hoping that after all these years, we might finally start over. I didn't realize I was funding a performance. That night, I walked into the house where I had once been a shadow, now glowing like a wedding hall. A long table draped in satin, scented candles, white orchids in every corner. I saw my grandparents chatting with a few relatives. Everything was too perfect, too much like an event that wasn't meant for me. Taylor descended the stairs in a striking red dress, arm in arm with a man I had never met. Everyone clapped, and just as I raised my glass ready to give a toast, my mother abruptly stood up, voice booming. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we are not only gathering to celebrate, but also to share a joyful announcement. Taylor and her boyfriend Andrew are officially engaged." Cheers erupted like a wave. I stood frozen. My hand tightened around the wine glass. My mother glanced at me, with no hint of guilt, then looked away. I turned to my father, but he only stepped forward and gripped my wrist, coldly whispering, "Don't ruin this. If you make a scene tonight, don't expect anything from this family. Not a word, not a cent." And that was the last moment I had a choice between silence and truth. I stepped into the center of the room, all eyes turned to me. "Excuse me, may I have a minute?" I said clearly. Taylor froze, her smile fading. Tonight's party was organized with money I sent to celebrate the first major milestone in my career. I was recently appointed Chief Strategic Investment Officer at Bradley and Carter Capital, but my mother chose to turn this event into someone else's spotlight. No one laughed anymore. Andrew looked at Taylor, confused. "You said this was just a family dinner?" Taylor stammered, "I was going to tell you later." "With the money your sister gave to surprise everyone?" he interrupted, pulling his hand away from hers and walking off. I didn't look after him. I looked straight at my parents. I've stayed silent my whole life to keep the peace, but today, I don't need approval from a family that's always told me to know my place. My mother shot up, her face pale with anger and embarrassment. "Who do you think you are, humiliating Taylor in front of everyone?" "I don't need to think," I replied. "I know who I am, and I've grown enough not to accept being disrespected anymore." My father clenched his fist. "If you walk out of this house tonight, don't expect to come back. To us, you never existed." I was about to turn away when Grandpa Bill's voice rang out, firm as a bronze bell. "If she doesn't exist to you, then it's time we make things clear." The whole room turned. Grandma Margaret stepped up beside her husband, holding his hand tightly. "We updated our will 3 months ago," she said calmly. "The entire estate, the house, the shares, the savings, will go to Brooklyn. Not because of her title, but because she's the only one who never demanded anything." My mother looked shattered by the truth. Taylor burst into tears and ran upstairs. As for me, I just stood there, not proud, not bitter. Just someone who had finally reclaimed her voice after years of living a script she never chose. I stepped out the door, the evening breeze gently brushing my cheek, no longer the chill of being left out, but the refreshing air of liberation. This time, I didn't leave in silence. I walked out as a statement, and I would never again ask anyone for permission to shine. The house in Willow Glen that night felt like a play whose curtain had just fallen, but the audience didn't applaud, and the main character wasn't who they once thought. When I walked out, no one reached out to stop me. The door closing behind me wasn't as heavy as I expected. It felt more like a gate opening into freedom. For the first time, I wasn't the one retreating in silence. I was the one walking away in the light of truth. I didn't look back. No need to anymore. Because behind me was a past that no longer had the right to define my future. In the car waiting at the end of the alley, Grandpa Bill sat in the passenger seat, holding a cup of hot tea like his old habit. Grandma Margaret was in the back seat, her eyes still glimmering with quiet emotion. I sat down, said nothing for a few minutes, just listened to the engine start, blending into the soft whistle of wind through the trees. "You did well," Grandma Margaret said softly, "not because you spoke loudly, but because you spoke at the right moment." I nodded. Everything inside me was still shifting, but it was no longer anger. It was something deeper. Peace. As if I had finally placed the last stone on a wall I had quietly built for years. 2 weeks later, I received the official copy of the updated will. I sat silently in the lawyer's office, reading the cold but weighty words: house, land, shares, investment funds. Everything was now under my name. But what moved me most was a small note at the bottom of the page. "Left to Brooklyn, the only one who understands the value of silence and the moment to speak." I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I felt seen. I never wished for my grandparents' assets. I only wished that someone would, just once, see the things I had done not for show, but because I truly believed in living with integrity, even when no one clapped for me. After that night, my family fell into a silent earthquake no one spoke of, but everyone felt. Relatives gradually fell quiet, avoiding the topic of that party. My mother didn't call, my father didn't text. Taylor? She disappeared from social media for a while, and according to Grandpa Bill, had moved back into the same old room, the room she once took from me. As for me, I returned to work. But something had changed. Not the title, not the new office. It was the way people looked at me, no longer as a surprising phenomenon, but as someone who truly belonged in that position. They no longer said, "She's good even with her background." They said, "She's good, period," and I no longer tried to prove anything. I just did the work because I knew who I was. Every weekend, I drove to Sacramento, where my grandparents lived in their red brick house surrounded by ferns and daisies. We ate apple pie like always, played Uno, and flipped through old photo albums I once thought no one kept. There was a photo of me sitting in the old room, hair tied to the side, holding a book bigger than myself. "We kept everything," Grandpa Bill chuckled, "because we always believed one day you'd need the past to see how far you've come." One time, while clearing the table after dinner, I asked, "Did you ever regret leaving everything to me?" Grandpa Bill placed his hand on my shoulder. "We didn't leave it because of material things, Brooklyn. We left it because you're the only one who truly understands the value of choice, and you chose what's right, even when it hurt." Grandma Margaret added, "You didn't ask for anything, and that's exactly why you deserve more than anyone who ever demanded." At that moment, I understood something very profound. True inheritance doesn't lie in the numbers on a legal document. It lies in trust, and how a person lives up to that trust every day. I walked into the backyard, where the spring breeze lightly brushed through my hair. The scent of orange blossoms filled the air. The sky was painted in shades of blue and purple, a kind of peace that had no name. I stood there for a while, said nothing, just closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I didn't need any more victories, no more recognition, because finally, I had something I had always lacked throughout my childhood, a place to stand, and an unconditional belief that I was worthy. 3 years after the night I walked out of the house in Willow Glen, my life had moved into an entirely different chapter, not because of the title or the assets, but because I had decisively folded away the past that once bound me and opened up a life no longer defined by the lack of affection. I still remember very clearly the day I was officially appointed CEO of Bradley and Carter Capital. I had just turned 30, the youngest female leader in the company's nearly 70-year history. The media reported it widely. My photo appeared on financial news sites alongside headlines like "Brooklyn Adams, a new generation CEO redefining global investment strategy." But what made me proud wasn't the spotlight. It was the moment I stood on that stage and didn't feel like I was proving anything. I was simply doing the right thing, with all the passion and values I had forged through years of being unseen. After the ceremony, I pulled out my phone and called Grandpa Bill and Grandma Margaret. My voice was choked. I did it. On the other end, he laughed aloud. "We knew it, all along." And Grandma Margaret said just one sentence I will never forget. "You don't need to reach a certain point to be worthy. You've always been worthy, from the very beginning." Every Saturday, I kept the tradition of driving to Sacramento to have dinner with my grandparents. We talked about work, sometimes politics, sometimes life's little things. Sometimes it was just sitting together watching an old movie or listening to Grandpa Bill repeat a story I knew by heart. But now, I didn't listen with just my ears. I listened with my heart, because I knew my presence there wasn't an obligation, but a shared joy by choice. I no longer talked about Taylor at meals, and honestly, I didn't think about her much anymore. I heard from old acquaintances that after that party night, Taylor's life spiraled through a few fleeting relationships, an unfinished fashion course, an abandoned TikTok channel, and eventually, she moved back into the same room from years ago. Once, Grandma Margaret said, "Your mother asked about you through a mutual friend," but I just nodded and changed the subject. I didn't hate them. I didn't resent them either. It's just that I no longer needed anything from them. Because true peace doesn't come from being loved the right way by others, but from learning to love yourself after all the times you've been rejected. I built my leadership team at the company not based on fancy names on resumes, but on capability, integrity, and genuine potential. I encouraged diverse voices because I understood the feeling of being shut out of conversations. I invested in startups founded by women and immigrants because I knew what it felt like to start when no one believes in you. One spring afternoon, as I was leaving the building after a strategic meeting with shareholders, I saw someone waiting in the lobby. I slowed my steps. It was Taylor. She looked tired, thinner, but still wore a designer coat, still kept her signature elaborate hairstyle. Only her eyes were different, no longer confident, but full of insecurity hidden behind layers of mascara. "I'm not here to apologize," she said immediately. I want to understand. How did you manage everything when no one ever lifted you up?" I looked at her, not angry, not pitying, just honest. Because I once had nothing. And it's exactly when you have no one, you're forced to stand on your own. You've never known that feeling. She said nothing, then turned away, walked out of the lobby without another word. I didn't stop her. Some people need to fall many times to find themselves, if they truly want to. I returned to the office where my team was waiting to continue building a new global strategy. I stood in front of the big whiteboard and wrote the first line in red marker. Value does not lie in where we start, but in how we never abandon ourselves along the way. It wasn't just a motto for the company. It was what I had lived through, day by day, night by night. I no longer needed approval from a family that once denied me. I didn't need applause from those who weren't there when I fell. I had myself. And for the first time, that was enough.